Hi everyone, welcome to Think Smart Home. In my last video, I showed you how to use Cloudflare Tunnels to access our home network remotely. We created some public host names to access resources within our local area network. As the name suggests, these are public host names. That means these are accessible to anyone over the internet. So we need to increase the security of these public host names. Before we go deep into this video, I would highly recommend you to watch the previous video. You should be seeing a link on the top right corner of this video if you want to watch that video. I would also leave a link down in the description below if you want to watch that later. Okay, let's jump into this video now. So to increase the security of the public host names which we created earlier, we will be adding some authentication methods. The first one, public IP address authentications. So Cloudflare will be checking if you are accessing that public host name using your own public IP address, and that will be bypassing all other authentication method, and it will give you access to that public host name straight away. The second one, the email authentication. In this case, we will be using Gmail. So to use Gmail seamlessly, we need to integrate Gmail with our Cloudflare account. I will show you the Gmail integration process step by step. So it should be easy and straightforward. Another authentication method which by default is present in there is one-time PIN. I personally don't like this method because if you are trying to access your network remotely, and sometimes you have to wait for the PIN for maybe few minutes. So I personally use the IP authentication or the Gmail authentication, which works for me. I don't have to do anything extra to pass through the authentication methods. Alright, so now that we have some idea that what are we going to do today, let's jump into the video. Okay, before we start, I would assume that you have already set up the Cloudflare tunnel and the connector is up and running. If you still are not sure how to do that, I have created a video to show you this step by step. I will leave the link to that video down in the description below. So watch that video before you can follow along in this video. On your Cloudflare dashboard, click on Zero Trust. Click on Access. Under Access, we will be working on Application and Access Groups. Before we do that, let's quickly look at what we have in the tunnel. So this tunnel we created in the last video, and we created some public host names as well. So we will be securing these public host names in this video. So we will start with the access groups. So what are the access groups? Now access groups are groups of authenticators which we will be using in the policies. Now these could be usernames, these could be IP addresses, or these could be any identity providers. So the advantage of using access groups is these can be used in multiple policies and in multiple applications at the same time. And if something changes in the background, let's say you are using email address or IP address to authenticate your access to any application, and that IP address has changed in the background. If you are not using an access group, you have to go to each and every application and their policies and update that IP address. But if you are using access group, you just have to go and update that access group with a new IP address, and it will be updated in all the applications and their policies. So it is super user friendly and super easy way to do the things. Alright, for this tutorial we will be creating 3 access groups. One will be for email address, one will be for IP address, and one will be for country. I know the country authentication can be bypassed easily if someone is using VPN, but I would still add it as an additional check in conjunction with my email authentication. Okay, let's start, and we will add a group. Click on add group and then give it a name. Give it a descriptive name which you can understand easily that what does this mean. Now each group should have a criteria. So the minimum criteria is each group must have one include rule. So let's add a country and then enter your country in there. I will add Australia. So if you are planning to travel to any other country for your holidays, let's say, you can simply add the name of the country in here and it should be added to all other applications and policies. So you don't have to go and add it on all the policies or the applications separately. So I would click save. So the country is added. I will add another one, which is the IP address, and then select the IP ranges. So here we need to add our public IP address. This is my public IP address. I'm just using the VPN, so this is not really my public IP address. So we'll go back and then paste the IP address in there, then click save. So we have added two access groups. Let's add the last one, which is the email. Enter your email address in here. So this is my temporary email address which I have created for this tutorial. Since we will be using Gmail authentication, so I have to use Gmail ID in there. So I'll click save. So we have added a 3 access group which we will be using to authenticate our applications basically. Let's go to our application tab and then start creating your applications. So what are the applications? Applications are basically the same fully qualified domain names which we created in previous video. So we will be adding them under the application so that we can add policies against them so that those can be authenticated before someone can get access to them. Okay, let's add our first application. Click add an application. It will be a self-hosted application, so select self-hosted, give it a name, and then here you can select the session, that how long this session will stay active before another authentication will take place. So maybe 6 hours. And then here we need to add the domain or the subdomain or the fully qualified domain names that we created previously. If you don't remember, we can quickly go back to the tunnels. Click on the tunnel, click configure, and then click on public host name, and then here you go, we have the subdomains. So we will go back. The first one is NAS, and then select the domain name. I will leave everything as a default. If you can add the logos and the tags in there, but default of everything is fine. So this is the first identity provider. We didn't look at the identity providers yet. This is the default one, so we'll leave this one for now. Click on next, and now we have to add the policies. Here we need to give our policy a name, so I will give email country, and then in the action we can use block, bypass, or allow our service out. So in this case we will allow. So basically if email and country are as per the authentication, then it should allow the access to that application. So this option will pick up the session from the application. So in here we'll check email and country. So if we come here, we have this selection of include or require or exclude. So as per Cloudflare documentation, so include will act like an OR gate. So if you have say more than two include rules, if any one of them agrees or passes, then it should pass through the authentication. So the exclude will be working as a NOT gate. Basically, if user is meeting an exclude criteria, he will not be given access to the application. And then require, definitely, as the name suggests, is a must meet criteria. If a user is not meeting the required criteria, it will not be given access to the application. Okay, let's go back to our application settings. So for the emails, I will select in require, basically because I want email authentication to be a must to get the access, because as I discussed previously, the country authentication can be bypassed using VPN. So I would still kind of include it in my authentication as an additional check basically. So we will ignore the IP address for now because we are going to create another policy which will bypass this policy if the IP address authentication is passed. Okay, let's drop down. We don't need to create any additional rules. So basically, you can create any additional rules for a specific application. So leave everything as default and then click next. Leave everything in default on this page as well and then click on add application. Here we go. We have added our application. So if we click on that application and click on configure, we can see our application is up and we have one policy that is also added to that. That is policy which we just created, which is checking the email and the country. Okay, let's add another policy for the IP address. So click on add a policy and then give it a name. I'm just giving it the same name as the user group, which is not a very good practice. It might confuse you down the road. So just to differentiate, I might add a word bypass. You should be picking up a policy name which is a bit different to your access groups. Okay, in the actions, we need to select bypass. Now we need to be very careful when we select the bypass, because when we select the bypass, if the IP address authentication does pass through, it will bypass all other authentications. So I would highly recommend you select bypass only if you have a dedicated IP address from your ISP or you are using any VPN service, let's say Surfshark or private internet access, and you have dedicated IP address from them, and only add that dedicated IP address in the access group which we created earlier. Okay, and then come down and check the IP address and then include is fine. We cannot mark it as required because as per the Cloudflare, a policy must have a group with include type or have at least one include rule. So in this case, we have only one rule, which is the IP address. So we have to mark it as include. So as the previous policy, leave everything as default and then add a policy. Now here we can see we have two policies. One is for email in the country and the other one is for IP address. Now these policies, they work like a firewall. So if the system will look at the first policy and if the authentication in that policy does work through, it will simply jump out and it will not check the subsequent policies. I would move the bypass policy as my first policy. So this will avoid me authenticating through email when I'm sitting at my home using the internet from my ISP. So I will click save. Now let's quickly go back to configure. Now we can test the policies on this page as well. So let's test the policies. And now to test a policy, we need to enter an email address. So I will enter the temporary email address which I created for this tutorial and the one which we previously added to the access group. So I'll go back to the access groups and then copy this email address and back to the applications, test applications, and then paste the, let's click on test. So see, now the system has verified my IP address because the IP address which I am using right now is already in the system, or is already in my access group. So let's try to change that. So I will go back to my access groups and I will go to IP address configure, and then let's say I will enter any other random IP address 112. Click on save. Now my public IP address is different to what is sitting in my access group. So my IP address authentication should fail in this case. So let's go back to applications, configure, and then test the policies. I'll again paste the same email ID which I entered in my access group. So test the policies. This time the authentication for my IP address has failed, but the authentication for my email and my country passed. So okay, so now you can see my policy 1, which is for the IP address authentication, has failed, but my policy 2, which is checking the country and the email ID, has passed. So I would still have access to my application. So let's go back and test this one in the real time. So to test this one in the real time, let's go to tunnels, click on tunnel and click configure, and then select the public host name, which was the first one, which is the NAS. So I click on the NAS, and now see the policy is working. The system is asking me for the one-time PIN. So if I enter the email which I entered inside the access group, I will click on send me a code, and now system is asking me to re-enter the code which was just sent to my email ID. So it might take some time to get that code. So I go back to my email, check the email, and then copy the code, paste it back, and then sign in. So this should give me access to my application. There you go. So now we have access to the application. Okay, let's do another test. We will close this one, then click on this link again. So see, now this time it didn't ask me for authentication, because so this session duration is 6 hours. So for next 6 hours, it won't ask me for the authentication again. So let's go back to the configure and then click on this hostname now in incognito mode. So it will ask me for the authentication because we are in incognito mode. So that session is not active anymore. Here, if I enter any, let's say, random email, testuser@gmail.com. Now, system will never give us a clue that this email ID is not in the system, is not part of the access group for the email ID. The code will never be sent to any other email other than the one which we entered inside that access group. Okay, let's go back. All right, so we have verified the email authentication using one-time PIN method. So let's test the country authentication which we created earlier in the access group. So my country which I selected is in Australia. So right now, using my VPN, I have changed my country to Dubai. So let's verify that. So see, I have changed my country. Now I should not have access to my application because in access group my country of authentication is Australia. So let's test this one. So I have gone back to the tunnel. So if I click on the application, see now Cloudflare is telling me that for some reason, definitely is not telling me the reason, but it's telling me this page is forbidden for me. Okay, so I have connected back to the Perth based server using my VPN client. So now if I go back to the tunnel and try to access my application, it did work because again the country of authentication is now Australia, which is passing through. It did not ask me for the email verification or the email authentication because that session, the 6 hour session, is still active. But if I go to the browser in incognito mode, it will ask me for the email authentication as well because there is no session active in incognito mode. So okay, let's go back. Okay, now let's test the IP address bypass function. So Currently, this is my public IP address currently using the VPN. So I'll go back to my IP address. Remember, I changed the IP address to a random IP address. So I will give it my real public IP address. So now this should bypass all other authentications from my app to access the application. So if I go to the applications and configure, so now see my policy one is the bypass for the IP address. So if my public IP address matches to the one which is in access group, it will bypass all the authentication. So let's test this one. Okay, let's go back to the tunnels and then click on the host name and open this link in incognito window. See, this time it did not even ask me for email authentication, even incognito, because everything has been bypassed because of my public IP address. Okay, to summarize, let's go back to the applications and the policies to see what we did. So in the policies, the first policy is the IP bypass, which will bypass all the authentication which we just tested. The second policy is to verify or to validate the email ID and the country. Now in this case, for the first policy, I don't have to do any authentication. Basically, it's seamless if I'm on the dedicated IP address, which is part of the access group. So I don't have any problem with it. The little issue which I don't like comes in when I'm not sitting at my home, or I'm not on the dedicated IP address, which is part of the access group as my public IP address. That means I have to go and validate my email address every time I'm trying to access my applications. That validation might take few minutes because it will send me a code and then I have to punch that code back in after checking my email, which is kind of not very user friendly. So the one way to fix this one is using Gmail integration. Now I am doing this tutorial purely for Gmail integration because most of the home users they use Gmail. So for this tutorial we'll stick to the Gmail. Alright, so let's start the process for Gmail integration with a Cloudflare account. So to do that, on your Zero Trust overview, click on setting, click on authentication. Here we can see this default method which is one-time payment. We'll add new and then click on Google. The Cloudflare documentation is telling us a step-by-step process how to integrate Google with their Cloudflare account. So it's just simply follow these steps. Okay, for this we have to jump onto Google Cloud Platform. So let's log into Google Cloud Platform and then click on console. On this page we don't have any project, so select project and click on new project, give it a name and click create. Click on hamburger menu and click on API and services and click on credentials. We are now on the home page for a newly created project. So click configure consent screen. On this page click on external and then click create. Give application a name, so I'll give, select the email and then scroll down and then you have to give developer contact information, so I'll give the same email. Then I'll click on save and continue. On this page I will add some scopes. I'll click add or remove scopes and select the first one. Click on update. I can see the scope is added and then I will click on save and continue. I don't need to do anything in here, so I'll click save and continue and then review the summary and I can go back to the dashboard. Click here to go back to the APIs and services. Now click on credential. So here, click on credentials and auth client ID. Select the web application and then give your application a name. Now here we have to add a couple of URIs. So we'll go back to the Cloudflare documentation and then use the first one, copy the URL and then click on add URI and then paste this in there. We need to update our team's name in there. So to get the team's name, we can go back to the Cloudflare portal and then open settings, click on custom page, and this one is a team name. So I'll just copy this one, go back to the Google Cloud portal and then update my team's name in there. So this is done for the first one. So similarly, I'll go back to the Cloudflare documentation and then copy the second one and click on add URI and then paste in there. Similarly, I'll have to update the team's name in there as well. And that is done. Now we can click on create. Okay, so now we got client ID and the secret ID. We can use both of these inside the Cloudflare portal to integrate our Gmail ID. So let's copy the client ID and then go back to the Cloudflare portal and paste it in the app ID field. Do the same thing with client secret, copy the client secret and paste it in client secret field. I'm happy with the name, which is Google, so I click on save. Okay, now we can see another authentication method. So let's test it first. Now it's asking us to verify the email, so I will click on my email ID. Okay, so the connection is working fine, so a Gmail integration is working. Okay, let's go back to the applications. To do that, click on access and then click on the application name, click on configure, and then here we can see the authentication tab. Now we can see we have additional identity provider in there, which is the Google. So in my case, since I don't like to use the one-time pin, so I will disable one-time pin by clicking on this one. Now the one-time pin is disabled, so our system will never use one-time pin to authenticate my access to the application. So I'll just save the application. Alright, so let's test a newly created authentication method, which is the Gmail. So I have already bypassed IP address policy by updating my IP address access group with a random IP address, which is basically not my public IP address right now. So system will force me to authenticate before I can access my application. So let's go to the tunnels. I'm in the tunnel. I'll click on my application URL and I'll open it in incognito mode. There you go. So now it is checking for the Gmail authentication. So it's basically asking me to sign in with the Gmail ID. Okay, now here to prove that system only works, accept the Gmail ID which is already in the access group. I will log in with the Gmail ID which is not part of the access group. So I will log into my personal email ID, which is basically not part of the access group. So system should not allow me to access my application. Now the system is saying the account does not have access. This is because the email which I was trying to sign in with is not part of the access group. So let's try to sign in with the email which is part of the access group. Okay, so I will Close this window and open again in new Cognito window. Click to sign in. I will enter my email ID, which is part of the access group. That means that ID is authorized to access the application. Okay, so there you go. Now I have access to my application. The Gmail integration to access my application is working. To summarize, we added few access groups and then we use those access groups to access the applications by adding them into the policies. We also learned how to integrate Gmail login with the Google Cloud. So that's it for today's tutorial. If you think this video helped you, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing.